You know security is hard, so let's assume we're probably gonna get pwned by noon. But if we all start to get the basics right, we might not fully get pwned until tonight.
We'll get started. Welcome to Level Up Your Burp Suite Knowledge. And my name is Brian Johnson, and this is my good pal Joe Skeen. Joe, thanks for being here and doing this.
Happy to be here, Brian.
I'm going to just kind of turn things over to you. I did want to just to kind of check in and make everybody feel like part of the fun here. I do have a couple of polls I would like to pop up and get y'all's input on. I'm going to launch this. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to allow panelists to vote for sure.
Oh man, then I'll probably break something. Let's see.
So do you? Okay, it says attendees are now viewing questions. The question is, what is your primary web app pen testing tools? And there's multiple choice. You can click multiple things. Oh, and you know what? I think it actually did it launch? Do you see those two, Joe?
Yeah. Yep.
Did it give you both questions?
One and two. Yeah. How are things
okay.
This whole stay-at-home thing?
So there's two questions. Okay. Yeah. How's stay-at-home treating you, and what are your primary web app pen testing tools? The majority so far is Burp Free.
Burp Free. Good. Okay.
Coming up behind that is SQL Map. Coming up behind that is Web Browser Dev Council. Prayer. That's an option, and that's actually receiving quite a bit of votes. Okay. Oh, a pretty good mix. I don't see anything, and I don't know if I can share these results. We'll just leave it up for maybe 30 more seconds. Oh yeah, stuff is still ticking in. All right, many Burp Free users, a handful of Burp Paid, little side order of Zap, tiny bit of Acunetics, tiny bit of NetSparker, quite a bit of SQL Map, a little bit of WFuzz. Prayer is still a strong contender.
Good.
And as far as how people are doing with the stay-at-home, most people are saying it's fine. I didn't sign up to be a stay-at-home math teacher.
You at least got two of those, because we just got done recounting how fun stay-at-home math teacher is, especially high school level math, where I'm like, I don't even know what this is. So
I can't imagine even hanging. You did better than me. I'm doing reducing fractions and alligator greater than less than on fractions, and forget it.
I didn't even know which way it goes. Still, is it greater than?
Yeah. What does the alligator eat? I don't know.
Yeah, he eats more. All right, let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it. Let me end this. Let me see if I can also.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll just share. Okay. I'll just leave this share up. But I'll turn it over to you, Joe. I know you've got a lot of awesome burp stuff to share with us, and I'm excited to just be in student mode and put myself on mute and eat this granola bar and take it in like a kid at a movie. But if you've got questions for Joe along the way, please use that Q&A button in Zoom. I'll also try to watch the chat and get that going in one window, but I think it's just easier if you ask questions in the Q&A, because then I can answer it and then show the answer for the record and for others to see. So I'll shut up now. Thank you so much for doing this, Joe, and take it away.
Great. You can see Brian and my Twitter handles on there. I only use my Twitter account just so I can like all of Brian's tweets. That's about all it's for, Brian.
Nice.
Actually, it's been many years that I've been on Twitter, but I'm definitely one of those lurkers. So if you're looking for great tweets from me, you're not going to see it, but you're going to see a lot of retweets of some, stuff that people that I follow. So why did I do this? So you can tell I'm going to be terrible about looking at the camera, and I'm going to look at my notes over here. I think there's quite a few videos on YouTube, for Burp Suite in a variety of different trainings that are available. And, you can get a lot of information about burp and pen testing and web app. I've seen the quality is kind of all over the board. Yeah. And so there are a couple really good ones. I'll tell you, one that I really like, Brian, I don't know if you found any, is the, Bug Crowd did a series of videos on mostly bug bounty stuff, but they were using burp, so I thought it was kind of cool. Okay. And then Secure Ideas has quite a few good videos as well. And in the last month, because of the whole COVID, they've released quite a bit of their stuff as just whatever you call open source on YouTube. So some really great stuff on that as well. So I encourage you to check that out. They never really, from my perspective, cover how to get the most out of Burp and kind of how to get it going. It seems like from a pen testing or even bug bounty perspective, they just jump in, and maybe
Yeah.
that's the best way. But I found that when I started, I always have this gap where you don't know what you don't know. Like, how did you
Yeah.
get to point B? Or, oh, I was just supposed to know to turn off intercept. Um,
Yeah. Or set the
so
scope or all that
or
kind of
set the
stuff,
scope
right?
or all that
Yeah.
stuff. And so I feel like, this first session that we're doing is kind of, okay, I've used the, community edition. Now I want to go to just the next level beyond that. And then once we get that out of the way, then Brian and I talked about doing, the next level beyond that. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, so what we'll cover today, what is Burp? I'm going to do a quick history just because I find it interesting. If you think it's boring, just put a comment in there and Brian will just shoo me right along. We're going to do a quick overview of installing, getting started. And Brian, by quick, I mean really quick. So really what I'm going to tell you to do is go to the Burp page where they tell you how to do this, because it's actually really good. We don't need to cover that ground again.
Sure.
I'm going to do a tab tour, some configuration settings to make your life easier, even if you're on the community edition. Some of the methodology that we talk about towards the end is going to be for the paid version of Burp. I honestly think for $3.99, if you use it very often, it's totally worth it. I get that
Yeah.
may be expensive for some, but if you use Burp very often, you need to really move beyond the community edition
Yeah.
and get the paid version. It's just such a bargain. I mean, a lot of the tools are, relatively expensive. So Zap, I saw, was mentioned in the poll. Like, Zap out of nowhere has added like a ton of new features.
I heard
So
that.
maybe I think in the next 6 months I'm committed to like really trying Zap again. They have this thing called the HUD, and I know this about Burp, but it like overlays your web browser so that you can do tests from your web browser and send it
Really?
to Zap. So it looks pretty cool. If you're looking for just a completely open source option, and maybe we'll cover that at some point, Brian.
Cool.
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 And then my methodology for using Burp. So I'm going to give you the Portswigger answer, which is Burp Suite Professional is an advanced set of tools for testing web security. And I know you can all read. And so I'm just going to say that basically I underlined the intercepting proxy and cutting edge vulnerability scanner. Now, they believe their vulnerability scanner is cutting edge because of the Burp research, and they have some awesome researchers. Like James Kettle just does a phenomenal amount of research, and all of that research gets poured right back into the Burp scanner. This is really what differentiates the community edition from the pro edition is the scanner. You don't get the vulnerability scanner without paying. So that's really what you're paying for. So Brian, how do you say that name right there?
Oh, totally. It's easy. Daffod stuttered.
Daffod stuttered. That's exactly right. So I actually heard him say it, and I think it was on a Paul Security Weekly, and they were joking about how to say his name. So really just brief history. Burp started life. Daffod was actually a pen tester, and he called himself a lazy pen tester. And so he started writing these tools, and it really just started life as the intruder tool, because that tool was what he found himself using most often. And then he's like, hey, wouldn't it be sweet if I could actually have a proxy where I could, person in the middle, we'll use the PC terms, person in the middle, browser session, and all independent separate tools. Then he released a tool called SOC, which was really repeater. All in 2003, and he was just cranking those tools out and kind of just giving them out to the world. And then he's like, I really need to create a spidering tool to actually crawl the websites. And so he created the spider. And then he's like, hey, why don't I put all of these together? And in August of 2005, he did. And then he kind of switched over to doing this full time, because after Burp Suite was released, he got a ton of interest from the community. And before that, he was just doing pen testing. Now, in all of the interviews I've seen with him, everybody asks him how he came up with the name. And he's like, I have no idea. Like, there's no meaning whatsoever to the name Burp. And he's like, I really have thought about it so many years of just changing the name because it's just such a silly name. So.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Is he the author of the of the web app pen
Oh
testing
yeah,
playbook?
yeah.
Is that
Thanks for
some
bringing that up. Yep. So he actually wrote that Web Application Hackers Handbook, which is
hackers handbook?
still phenomenal today. It's in
Yep.
version 2. He said he was thinking about doing a version 3, but I literally have it on my bedside table because I read bits and pieces because it's so dense.
Yeah.
So I just started it over for the third time, but it's a great book. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so let's see if this works right here. So we'll talk
Yeah.
about the install and getting started. It did not, so let me pull this over here, see if this is going to be happy. So their install and getting started is actually really great. You download Burp Suite Pro, get your license key again. This assumes that you're going to do the paid version, Community Edition. It basically works the same. Launch Burp, configure Burp's display settings, configure your browser to work with Burp. Person in the middle, we need to get them to change that. It's just not PC, Brian. Yeah, I'll put in a ticket for that.
Okay.
Install Burp certificate so that you can actually person in the middle, and then they have some learning Burp, getting started basics, which this is where I was talking about where like getting started, like immediately it's like, okay, proxy intercept, here's data.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like they just jump right in. Their documentation is good, but it's really kind of broken up. It doesn't really tell you how to use Burp. It's basically, if you want a proxy, here's a proxy. If you
Right.
want a spider, and it's, here's a spider. So it's not really a how to use Burp. It's how to use features of Burp.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get rid of that.
And I think that was my biggest struggle first ever getting started with that is it opens up and you're like, although today there's and I'm sure you'll get into it too, there's the right click, do some scanning, but kind of back in the day, it was
Yes.
like, got a thing, I'm intercepting traffic. Where is the start new job or start new
Yes.
scan
Yes.
wizard?
Exactly.
And then, yeah, I found myself going back to help going, okay, piece by piece, show me what to do. But yeah, it's missing that holistic, like here's how to actually do testing.
Yep. And so, at a very high level, it's download, it's, launch after install, and then use Proxy plugin or change browser. I use Foxy Proxy, so we can
Yeah.
just flip over. So as we go through this, Brian, I am going to show, here is the Foxy Proxy plugin, and that basically, let's see if I can move. You can't see, but I'm actually moving all the videos out of the way.
Oh, sure.
So this adds the proxy to Burp so that we can send all of our intercepted data into Burp. So that's pretty straightforward. You just Google that, click on add it. I use Foxy Proxy Standard. I am going to be using, by the way, for our demo today, this BWAP, which is extremely buggy web app. It's another OWASP project. I would normally do our good friend Bjorn's Juice Shop because Brian wrote the Juice Shop shingle. Say that 3 times really fast. The Juice Shop jingle.
Nailed it.
But for this particular demo, I think BWAP works better. So we'll go back in. That was the Foxy Proxy, and then install the Burp certificate. So just by visiting Burp, you'll get a little.
Oh yeah, this is the part that trips up a lot of people, kind of wrapping your head around.
So right over here, you'll see the CA certificate. You'll click on that, download it in, and by the way, Brian, I test with Firefox. I see a lot of people, by the way, switching to Chrome, and I flip back and forth. I'll tell you one of the awesome things about Chrome is you can set up profiles and have different profiles in Chrome, and they're completely sandboxed. So you can have a profile, and maybe this is, again, for the next class, we'll talk about using profiles in Chrome. The profiles don't work the same in Firefox. In fact, I think they kind of stink compared to Chrome. But for whatever reason, I got in the habit of using Firefox, and I just always have. I'm starting to switch. But if you go, and if I gotta move the video again, where can I put this video where it's not in the way? Maybe down here at the bottom. Okay, preferences, and then privacy and security. Then go way down here. I think I'm still in the way. View certificates, and then you import that certificate. And that definitely is something that gets people tripped up. And like I said, it's kind of in the instructions, it's pretty good, but the getting there the first time can be kind of a pain. Okay, we good there?
Yep,
So next we're
good.
going to go on a tab tour. The configuration items to make life easier, we'll talk about the dashboard, and this is again a differentiation from the community edition to the paid edition. So the community edition doesn't really have the dashboard. I notice now in 2.0 they show it, but you can't actually do anything with the dashboard. We'll talk about setting scope, tab splits, that's just a preference of mine that I think makes life easy. Disable intercept by default. We're going to poke around at some of the filters real quick. And then we're going to talk about that automated vulnerability scanner, content discovery, and crawl versus audit like you talked about.
Yeah.
And then other tips of time allows, we'll see. So let's go ahead with our tab tour now. So let's start at the dashboard. So for sake of the demo, like I said, I have started this BWAP in a Docker container on another machine. I gave it a host name of bwap.local. And we'll just start then at the target tab. So this target tab didn't exist previous to 2.0. So we're, I should have looked it up, but I've been using Burp in beta for so long that I didn't really even remember when they officially released it as 2.0. But it's a pretty substantial difference between 1.7x and 2.0. So the things on the dashboard that I wanted to point out, and I'm just going to flip back to the slide for 1 sec, is this pause button up here, and then 2 other settings on the dashboard that will become important. These little gear icons right here as well. You're seeing that okay, right, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yep, looking good.
Okay. I wish it wouldn't auto forward. So we're going to select this gear icon right here. Default resource pool. This is something that I don't really pay attention to, but it's important to know that if you are slamming a website too hard, you can change this overall resource pool and back it off a bit. The things that I wanted to point out on the dashboard right now, and what's interesting as far as how I'm going to go about this, Brian, is that we'll hit some of these tabs and then we're going to circle back to them and see them in use. Because you have to have, essentially traffic being proxied through Burp for some of these things to show up. So I'll tell you one thing that drives me absolutely crazy is capturing stuff in Burp that I don't want in there. And by that, I mean, when you open up Firefox, it's just going, and you have Foxy Proxy enabled, it's just going to throw up a bunch of stuff over here in the issue activity and in your target tree, right? And I hate that. So one of the first things you can do before you enable Foxy Proxy is you can say, just do scope. And you can change that for both the live audit, and we're going to talk about what the difference is between, the passive and the live audit here in just a second. So if you just change that to scope, then it's going to keep all of that stuff clean. So when you export your findings into, and however you're going to do your report, you don't have all of those Firefox settings in there and all of the other websites you may have visited while you have Foxy Proxy enabled.
Gotcha.
We have new scan and new live task up there. We'll cover that in just a bit. But the first thing that I wanted to let you know, second thing I want to let you know is this pause up here. We'll pause those task executions as well. So if you don't want it to start populating this, or for whatever reason you want it to pause, you can hit that pause button and resume.
Oh, so traffic is still, is it that traffic is still getting proxied, but nothing's like getting passively scanned and
exactly. Yep. And what's kind of weird is, so if you, I guess, ever wondered, we'll skip over here to the target for just a second and click on sitemap. If you ever wondered how this sitemap is actually built, it's built now. I don't know if Spider did this before because I just didn't use, the pro version that much when I was on 1.7. The actual sitemap is built from this live passive crawl. So if you turn off the capturing as well or pause it, so if you just pause it, it'll actually queue responses, or you can just turn it off. That's another way of keeping that, when you launch, keeping that target clean, is just stop capturing. The live audit is actually, you see how we have an issue. We have, one high, one medium, and a low, and then an informational, so no mediums right now. That is actually any passively detected vulnerabilities. What do you think I mean when I say passive, Brian? I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, the passive scanner versus the active scanner.
Oh, I guess I would think of it more like, it could see based on, header type or something that they're, or that, I guess in that case, HTTP, it's able to see, okay, this is coming through the clear, we're going to and we see that there's form fields, so we know this is risky, whereas it's not doing anything active like fuzzing any of the
Yeah,
inputs for
yep,
SQL
exactly.
injection, that kind of stuff.
Yep. So it's definitely anything that it sees in traffic as it's being proxied.
Okay.
It's not actually attacking. So if we actually want to attack the website with the vulnerability scanner, we have to use one of those scans. Okay.
Okay.
So I think we covered those two areas. Now we'll go on to setting the scope. I think from an order of how I tend to go about setting up Burp, I set my scope pretty early because, like we said, I don't want it to be all nasty. So the first thing I do from setting a scope perspective, and that's on the target tab right here, is I always click this use advanced scope control. And this is where you get into kind of a double edge. Do I set my scope first, or do I proxy traffic first? I think for me personally, because I hate my dashboard having all kinds of, just Firefox settings or something, I actually tend to just paste my URL. So I'll actually just grab it and paste it. It's kind of a preference thing. You certainly can set your scope from the sitemap after you've captured it. But if you have it paused or turned off, you're not going to have a sitemap built to capture it from. The reason that I mentioned scope and from use an advanced scope control is that if there's specific areas as you're going through your scope that you want to narrow in on, you can actually add it to the scope. The other thing that I like to make sure that people know about is exclude from scope. And there's a couple different reasons why you would want to exclude something from scope. One of the things that I'll often exclude from the scope is the logout page. And then when you're doing things like intruder and repeater, you're not going to keep hitting that logout page and forcing login. Now, there's ways around that, but it's just if there's also areas where you don't want to touch. For instance, if you're going through an app and one of them is change password and you don't want it to change the password, then you can just set that to out of scope as well. So to do that, you can do it from a sitemap perspective. And if we didn't want it to touch the login page, you can say remove from scope. So you'll notice on the scope there that now we're not going to be testing the login page.
Oh, cool. Gotcha. And so am I right in that this would be an area where if you're a pen tester scoping an engagement with a client, you'd want to be real sure you understood, okay, customer, just to be clear, we are only testing domain.com, not authentication.domain.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you really want to figure out what is the beast that you're testing.
Exactly. And a lot of times inside the app itself, it may have a call to a particular, like you said, authentication, and we want to make sure that's out of scope, that we're not even touching it. We'll put that out of scope as well.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, use advanced scope control, exclude from scope. Now the next area is in the sitemap, so we're just going to get click back over here to sitemap, and you'll notice right away from a sitemap perspective that this to me, again, and this is a pro feature, so for those who don't have pro, you won't see this, but one of the things that drives me crazy is how busy this is. So if you right click basically anywhere and then click on the view, you can switch from left right to tab view. And now you'll notice how much cleaner this actually looks. And from a preferential perspective, that's one of the things that I always do. Once you set it, it'll stick. So this is also interesting. I noticed about Burp 2.0, a good percentage of the settings now stick, which you used to have to actually save them as a configuration file so that they do. I haven't actually figured out all of the places. Like I've been trying to go through and see what sticks and what doesn't stick. And so far, like almost all of them stick. It's really kind of bizarre. So I feel like I need to build like some kind of map, like saying, oh, this one doesn't stick, and you have to actually save that as configuration file. But let me show you what that did, Brian. So now when we click on the website as a whole, we're going to see essentially like that history of all the pages that we've touched so far. And I did pre-populate this a little bit, but really all I did is just essentially hit the landing page and nothing else yet. But you'll notice now the Issues tab is over here to the right. So anything that it did find from the root on down, so you'll notice on the login page in particular that we have the little red dot, which means there was a high finding. So depending on where I go in the tree, then it's going to show you the issues for that particular tree structure.
Gotcha.
And then the contents of the page.
Oh, I like that layout.
So again, that was just a right click. It's a view.
View, okay.
Left, right split, or tab splits. Now you'll find that in several different areas of Burp where you can control where the tab, whether it's tab splits or left, right views. We won't touch all of them today, but it's one of those things that unless you know to look for it, you may not know to actually turn it on. And, it just makes your life using Burp a little bit easier. Okay.
Sweet.
Okay, so the other thing we want to talk about, and this when I first started using Burp drove me crazy, and it's another thing that's in a couple of different areas. If you actually see the filter up here, it's not blatantly obvious right now that it's hiding not found items, hiding CSS. You actually have to click on it to get that context menu to come up.
It's a button that doesn't look like a button.
The button that doesn't look like a button. So one of the first things that I always change is show in-scope items, but I always do it, like I said, after I set my scope so that I know that I'm actually capturing. Because I can tell you, again, when I first started, that I didn't go back or that I would set this first, and I'd be like, Burp's not working. What's going on? Well, I had my scope screwed up, and I can't see that, stuff's not coming to the history. So after I have my scope properly set and I see that we have a history, then I'll say show in-scope items. The other thing I always change is turn on 400 errors. It's another thing from a default perspective that I think should just be on.
Yeah.
But I think from a testing perspective, I always want to see when there's error pages because I want to know why and go test them and make sure that they're. So I always turn that on.
Yeah.
Now you also will notice is that is also available like on the Proxy in HTTP history, same kind of context menu. So, and it's different on those. So see, I'd already messed around, turned it on here on the HTTP history and show only in scope items. We'll turn that on.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay, so now we're going to switch to the Proxy tab and go to Options, and don't send items to Proxy history or live tasks. Do you happen to know, Brian, what that does?
Don't send. What was the setting again? Don't send.
So it's right down here at the bottom. Let's try this. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, right?
Oh, okay. Oh, if out of scope. Again, just keeping you. Yeah, don't scan stuff you don't have approval for, and then also don't clutter up your history with stuff you don't care about.
Exactly. So not only then when you check that box, and it's what's weird is this particular setting kind of shows up in a couple different places. So I'll show you the other places. But so this is one of the settings that it will actually ask you about. So I'm going to flip back here just to history for a second. So it'll impact your history here. If you want to see some of that Google stuff in the background, you'll want to uncheck that box. But it also turns on this right here where it says logging of out-of-scope options is disabled. So when you first select your scope, it will pop up and say, do you want to stop logging? I always choose yes, because I don't want all of my history and my dashboard to get all filled up with a lot of stuff that is out of scope, especially because like when you hit from a findings perspective, again, back on the dashboard, when you hit Google and Yahoo or whatever is in your default pages, you accidentally go to Google to search for something while you're testing. If you don't have that set, you'll get a bunch of findings on there and you're like, oh, wait, what is, scroll over. That's for Google. That's annoying, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The single, I think, biggest tip from a new user perspective is turning off intercept. And I see myself, if I didn't have this set as my default, I would get caught by this every single day because it will basically intercept and stop and wait for you to do something. And you're like on the, you're refreshing. So we'll turn it on.
Yeah.
Intercept. So you're like refreshing. You're like sitting here like, is the internet, bro?
Right, and normally you land on the dashboard, right? So you're not
Yeah.
seeing anything except that
Yeah,
the
it's not here.
proxy,
Yeah.
yeah, the word proxy will glow a little
Yeah.
bit. But if you didn't see that, you'd be like, "What's
And
busted? Did I not do the cert right? Did I not do, you know?"
yeah, and not often do you have it actually, sitting side by side,
Yeah,
like I have it here. So it's like in the background, you're like, great. Now
yeah.
what? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Ah,
I really think that should be the default, and I also think it should be right here, and it's not.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Good
don't know
call.
why. It is a user option, and it's right here. I think I get why they think it should be a user option, but to me, that's just something that should be under the proxy. And I think I'll ask them to put it in both places.
Right.
So if you set it to always disable, now it's going to stick. So this was one of those ones that I was talking to Brian, that if you set it now, when you open and close Burp, it's going to stick.
Okay.
This is also how we talked about there's two different places to set. So controls for other items in scope will automatically be set to the proxy. So this is that area where I said in two different places that you can stop sending out of scope items and to, they say other tools. And by other tools, they mean, repeater, intruder, or whatever, anything that's out of scope, building the history. So there was two places to set that. So let's go back to our slides real quick. How are we doing on time? We're about 28. I got 28 minutes in. So doing good.
Yeah.
Set it to always disable. The other one was stop sending out of scope. It's just another area where you can send that. Okay. So let's talk about the dashboard a little bit. So we go back to the dashboard, and you may wonder what the live audit is actually finding or testing for. So when Burp introduced this in 2.0, there was a lot of confusion about what a new scan or new live task. So if we actually click the little gear icon, we can see what scan configuration that they're using. And it's the, what they call the current configuration. If we click on the edit button, we can see how it's configured and what issues are reported. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. You cleared
Okay.
this up. You cleared this up for me a little while ago, and I was glad because it was
So
kind of a black hole to me.
Exactly. Now, the other thing that I'm going to show on the dashboard, and I think this is probably, a good time to do it, is if you don't like those or you want to know, so the other thing from a scanning perspective, if you want to see all of the configurations, you go to the configuration library. So it's Burp configuration library. It'll show you all of the built-in configurations in Burp and how they're configured, and you can create your own. So you see one of the first ones is add links to the sitemap. That's basically this passive crawl right here that is going to add to the sitemap.
Cool.
So that that sitemap that's under the target, and then you'll see all of these different ones. You'll see that they're broken down into audit checks and crawl. Audit checks and crawl are essentially the two different options that replaced the active scan and spider. So crawl is essentially the replacement for spider. So if you want to crawl a website and build out that sitemap, this is where those are defined. Now let's pick the first crawl one. Click on edit, and again you see the built-in button. If you build your own, you can highlight and just show. If we show custom, in this particular instance I don't have any custom, but I do build custom and built in. So let's pick this crawl 10 minutes, and there's a couple important things I want to point out. If you are building your own, if you don't expand this button right here where it says expand, so you see this one that's expanded, all that's set on this particular crawl limit 10 minutes, the only setting that they have set is run for 10 minutes and 5,000 locations discovered. If I collapse this, it will erase all of the settings regardless of whether you hit save. So let me say that one more time.
Yeah, please do.
If you collapse this and hit save, you will essentially make this crawl limit 10 minutes nothing. you will have wiped out all of the settings. So on something like this one, that's not, I mean, it is kind of a big deal because you only want to run for 10 minutes, but I'm going to go to one of the more advanced ones. So let's actually look at the audit checks. We'll edit that one. Now you can see all of the audit checks that are defined. And you see how this is, expanded for the issues reported. Yeah. So what this is going to do is passive, light active, medium active, and JavaScript analysis. They're going to do those areas. And then if you wanted individual areas, so you see these little bubbles down here.
Yep.
When we pick medium, it's going to do OS command injection. I'll scroll this over just a little bit so you can see medium, light, passive. So you see whatever is checked here is what it's going to check for. Does that make sense, Brian?
It
kind of sanity check me there. So people, I think, are often wondering, if I want to do a medium active scan, what all is going to be checked? Like would I hit SQL injection on a medium? No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right? Because that little checkbox is not checked. So if I'm hoping to find SQL injection with the active scanner, I'm not going to hit it with the medium active. And you can go through and then kind of tailor even these custom. If you want to do one for just SQL injection, just do the SQL injection, right? And then you can kind of tailor your scans. But I will remind you again, if you don't leave it expanded and click save, none of the settings will actually be saved.
So if you, okay. So if you collapse that right now,
So let me go to maximum and click edit. If you collect, so you see all of these ones that are expanded. It makes more sense when there's more.
Right.
If I collapse that and click save, I will have wiped out all of the settings for audit optimization.
Okay. Oh, but you would save yourself from pain if you hit cancel.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And when this becomes important is when you're making your custom ones, because I've seen a lot of people go through and set a lot of things and collapse them as they go.
Yeah.
And if they are saved collapsed, it'll say not defined, which is literally not defined, meaning that whatever you checked here, you just unchecked it by collapsing it. It's I think one of the worst non-intuitive designs you could possibly have. But so let's kind of look then. So we've kind of gone through the configuration library and how you can create your own. What I was going to do next, and let's see if I missed anything on there, is really kind of talk about how I conduct a test.
Yeah.
And this is, I think there's multiple approaches, Brian. One is, if you're a bug bounty person, I don't think you would test this way. If you're a web app or CTF, you may not test this way. So that's why when we talked about, this particular process I use is for web app pen testing. If you're doing bug bounties, you're going to probably maybe configure Burp the same way, but use it differently. You may not use the active scanner, or you may use it more selectively. Because one of the things, and I can remember one of your stories a long time ago, the reason I showed you how to look at those options is because if you just go set your sitemap and you're on a pen test for a client and you just say, rip it, thorough. Why wouldn't I do thorough? Like, you're just going to light the place up, right? A decent place. If you're on a production website, which you probably shouldn't be, but some people don't have that option, and you send all of the active checks, it's going to populate the database with a bunch of garbage. Like, it'll try and add users. So it'll add a ton of users, weird usernames. If that is in scope, based on the scope that you set, it just totally wreaks havoc on a production. So you probably don't want to do that. And that's why I wanted to show that, because a lot of people would be like, cool, I got Burp, let's just let her rip.
Turn up to 11.
I paid that, $3.99. I want to get my money's worth out of it. So. Okay, so from a steps perspective that I use, open Firefox, disable Foxy Proxy. That just keeps us from sending all the garbage. Then I start Burp in in the paid version. You can actually create a project file, which you'll want to do because you'll start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. And then, so you want to save that project file. I say disable task processing on dashboard, like we showed. Set the scope. I said copy and paste URL. It really depends for me whether I right click in the, the hierarchy or if I just copy and paste. I find myself more and more just doing the copy and paste, but it's just a preference thing. Then re-enable task processing. Turn your Foxy proxy back on. And then my methodology is always to touch every endpoint that you can find and just let the passive scanner do its work. Remember, we talked about the passive scanner over here, and it's going to be passively just finding any vulnerabilities that exist in this website. So just let it do its work. It'll find things that, as a pen tester, what the passive scanner allows you to do is not have to worry about these like X-frame options, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that is reportable, but if you did that manually, it just takes time and it wastes your time. Let the passive scanner find those things for you so you can move on to more important things, because we're always scoped to a time limit.
Yeah.
Hey, no, see the mousey slidey thing always wants to also forward the slides. So I say mark interesting things as you go along. One of the things from a history perspective that we didn't talk about is that as you see interesting things, you can, for instance, send them to repeater. We'll cover that next time. And also, if you intercept something, so if we turn that intercept on, we can actually make a comment on this and say, test this later.
Oh, cool.
And make it a pretty color. Let's make it red, like, oh, this looks juicy. And one of the reasons I mentioned this here, Brian, is from a testing efficiency standpoint, I don't have to get distracted and follow a tangent and a rabbit hole right now. I can just say, oh, that looks good. I don't want to forget that.
Yeah.
So if we go back then to our history, you'll see it's all nice and pretty red with a test this later.
That's a good idea. I'm totally the guy who, I see a shiny object and it's just,
yeah.
where did the last 12 hours of my life go?
Exactly.
I haven't finished mapping the app yet.
Yep, and that's why, just from an efficiency standpoint, if we go back to the, map the app, go all the way through, touch all the endpoints, mark interesting things as you go along. Okay. Sometimes I'll send them to repeater, like, the best approach, I think, from my perspective, is mark it as you go and make different colors for different things. Like red, I'm almost positive that this is exploitable. Yellow, even like that high, medium, low, just use that same marker. Content discovery, crawl then audit. Repeat for manual testing. So let's go through that manually. So if you see on this, it tells you how to log in. So assume that I've gone through and I've set my target. So we've set our scope. We're good. The sitemap's starting to build out already. Our dashboard has the splits the way that we want them. Right here, we have splits the way we want them. So we're just going to go ahead and log in first. What do we do, Brian? Why isn't it logging in?
The proxy. It's the proxy is glowing. Yes.
I left it in intercept, right? And it does at least turn orange.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, the reason why I use Bbox on this, the other thing I wanted to mention, not that they're an unpaid sponsor or anything, is that one of the things I find is that if in the dashboard, for instance, you get a hit on like one of those clickjacking, you can select clickjacking and just kind of ratchet up the level that you want. So if you want to really focus on, HTML injected reflection, and this is, I think, the difference, and not, again, that this is a BWAP sales versus Juice Shop or some of the other ones, is that, Juice Shop is one that you work your way through the process versus like BWAP or some of the other ones, you can actually just specifically focus. So we saw iframe injection. So we can actually select iframe injection and set which level. And there's 3 levels on most of them, low, medium, and high, and just say hack. So then if we only want to focus, like I just want to focus on making my, reflected cross-site scripting testing better, you can do that, as opposed to Juice Shop, where you're going to just work through challenges as you go.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I mentioned that. So again, from a testing methodology standpoint, just click on all the endpoints. We won't click reset, change password, never mind, all of the bugs that are available, right? So you see that our passive is starting to get a workout.
Yeah, yeah.
The next thing then that I would always do, and this is a relatively, it's not a new feature, I'll tell you what's new. Click on engagement tools and then discover content. So I'll leave that there for just a second. Because this again is one of those things that's kind of confusion between crawl and discover content. So discover content is essentially a brute forcer like WFuzz, I think some people mentioned, and GoBuster has been really popular. This is essentially that. What they didn't have before is the ability to use custom lists. I can't remember when they added it, but it's been relatively recent. So from a tip perspective, don't recurse 16 levels deep or you'll be here for a month. I always start out at like 2.
Yeah, yeah.
Built-in shortlist I will use just for this demo, but oftentimes, Brian, we'll just use the same list from our Durbuster directory, or the sec lists. You pick it depending on what type of an app you're doing, right? So there's like, .NET apps or whatever, there's lists for that. Names observed on targets, exactly what it sounds like. If it sees a name like BWAPT, it's going to include that in the list. For purposes of today's discussion, we'll just take those out so we can go through it relatively quick. We're getting tight on time. Test these extension. We're on a PHP only app. There's probably no point in doing ASP or SPX, so that's just
I always forget that. Yeah, yeah.
So we can take those off. Just do remove HTM's possible. Okay, so and then discovery threads. And of course, the point of this is to add discover content to the sitemap over here.
Yep, gotcha.
This is one of those areas where you may want to slow it down or throttle a little bit so you don't whack the site.
Yep.
And what's weird about this one, unlike the other tools, like the go button isn't like here. You actually have to go back to control. And watch as we hit this, then it's going to start building out the sitemap more. So we're going to fire it off and it's just going to, beat down on that website and we'll see more content there.
Oh, that's cool.
You'll notice it'll show over here on the sitemap all the stuff that it's added. And you'll see from an icon perspective, or at least a color perspective, the page is being built out as areas that have either been directly browsed through. That's why some of them are gray. In this case, since we're hitting the website, it's going to add them. At any point, you can pause it. And this is where I'm going to jump to really quickly the extender tab. We'll hold that one. Okay, so we'll kill that for now and say, yeah, we've seen that. We're getting short on time. Let's go now to where we talked about scans. So if we go back on the dashboard, you can kick off a scan here, and this is going to be the vulnerability scanner or the crawler. So a couple things I'll point out here real quick as well. If you're on a pen test, scanning from the root of the domain is probably not something you're going to want to do. You probably want to do some more selective scanning based on what we saw from both our discovery and just manually poking at the site. So when we click on scan, now you get this new scan, which is new to Burp 2.0, and we can do a crawl and audit, just a crawl, or audit selectum items. So Brian, do you remember when we talked about crawl and audit, what the difference between the two are?
Yeah, kind of. Are they mapping to what Burp used to call scan and spider or something like that?
Yeah, so crawl is basically spider. Audit then is the scanning engine.
Gotcha, yeah.
Okay, so now here's where we pick the scan configuration and we'll select from the library. And this is those crawls that we saw earlier because we only select the crawl option.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to pick the default one. And then this is another important point from the crawler. The crawl is going to crawl the application, and if we want to use a credentialed scan, which we probably should, otherwise we're not going to crawl the app as a user. We actually need to click new and add it. So we'll just call it, B. We know the username is B and bug.
Oh, gotcha. You're kind of macroing your log in to be part of what you're about to do.
And then the resource pool if we don't want to go, kill it. And then now the question is, what's happening, Brian? What's it doing?
Right now it's doing its thing, but under a tab. Yeah, okay. Say
right.
Under the non-active tab. So it did not light up dashboard tab, right? To like let us know something.
Usually it will, that it fired off.
Okay, maybe I didn't catch it.
So we crawled the website and you saw that it said unauthenticated first. Now it's going to an authenticated crawl. But the other thing you may wonder is what's actually going on in the background. So we didn't talk a lot about Extender because I knew we wouldn't have enough time to cover all of this. But I'm going to pause this for just a sec. And we're going to jump into the Extender tab and at least talk about one add-in that I use. And then in the next session, we'll go through a bunch of add-ins, okay?
Cool.
So one of the add-ins that I like to add is called Flow. So you just go into the BA App Store and you will notice on the Community Edition, any ones that don't say Pro you can use. So like ActiveScan++, there's a whole bunch of them. Just try them out is what I say. A lot of people have their favorites, but there's some of these that aren't as popular that are actually really good. They may just be new.
Yeah.
So you can sort by that. All we do is click on it, .NET install. We'll cover that in more detail. So one of the extensions that I've added is Flow. Now, I think personally Flow is pretty cool because you may wonder what the heck this is doing.
Yeah.
So we'll click play again. If we go into Flow, now we can see all of the stuff that's getting thrown at that website.
And can you not get that visibility with anything inside? Yeah, the gear icon there of the actual scan. Like, can you, because that's like such a blind spot. And for the longest time, I think maybe until you showed me Flow, I was like, I'm just not seeing it. Because I would get estimated time, 47 years. And it's like, well, why? Yeah. Why? What are you doing?
Why? Yeah, what are you doing? Yeah. And Flow's pretty cool because then you can go back then and say, oh, this particular one looks interesting. Then I want to send it to Repeater, Intruder, or one of the others.
Yeah.
Okay, so, that is only crawling the website. We'll let that run. It'll finish pretty quick, and you'll see that really it's just trying to crawl the website based on any of the links that it finds. It's not doing any auditing. So before we run out of time, I'm just going to pause that one, and we're going to do one more. We're actually going to start at the top at this point. Click on Scan. And we talked about scans a bit. We're going to do Audit Selected Items. We're going to create a new task, and this gives you the opportunity right here in this Consolidate Items. If there's duplicates in there, like Documents only has one point, we'll say Consolidate, and it'll ask you how, remove duplicates, right?
Nice.
So we'll say Next, but here's another important point I wanted to make. If we are nervous about testing admin, like, I want to stay away from that for now.
Yeah.
Just click Remove and take out the ones that you think might be problematic, like log out, right? Because we took it out of our not allow in scope. Like, don't log out. Like, and there's ways around that, but this is just kind of an example of things we can do to make our scanning more efficient.
Yeah.
Okay, so you notice now that there's the application login is grayed out. So we'll go select from library. And this is where we talked about the different audits, right?
Okay.
We have maximum, thorough. For right now, we'll just say light active, which isn't going to catch much. And then our resource pool, we're going to say okay. And just let it run. So now we are actively attacking the site. So we are sending payloads. If we go back to the dashboard, we'll see that it's running. And oh my God, look at all these things it's finding. Cookies not set, and right. I mean, it's just all kinds of areas. So if we go into Flow and we want to see, so let me just pause it real quick because it does go by relatively fast. If we go into Flow and we want to see, the reason that I like Flow from I would say a newer pen tester perspective is that you can actually kind of see what it's doing.
Yeah.
So look right here. See this blah, blah, blah. So what we can tell is that the actual scanning engine is just throwing random stuff in here just to see what happens. And this gives you, as a newer pen tester, like, oh, I wouldn't have maybe not have thought of that. Like, this kind of stuff in any of the training classes is the areas that I find they don't teach, right? It's always like test for cross-site scripting. And so you'll see that it'll, put stuff in the session ID and the cookies, and then you're like, from a training perspective, like you're training yourself based on what the scanner is doing.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Yeah,
Cool.
let the scanner teach you a few things.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also that low-hanging fruit. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I didn't show is that we can start scanning just on the password. So if we do a scan and open the scan launcher, it's going to start from this down. So from a just, I don't want to tear this whole app up, I want to see how it's going to react. Let's start at one of the subdirectories, way down in the path, and just test from there. So Brian, we are about 5 minutes. I've talked enough. Let's go back and say we talked about all of these, but coming up next time, here's all the stuff we didn't cover. Repeater, intruder, extender, all of those plugins, there's a lot of them. Burp Collaborator, one of my favorite things.
Yes.
When I discovered Burp Collaborator in one of the training sessions I took, I was just like, that is awesome. Because session handling rules. So I mean, there's a ton of stuff in here as far as session handling rules, and all kinds of stuff to learn. Like when you start going through these tabs, we didn't even talk about turning on dark mode. Like that's like a necessary evil, right?
Oh yeah, you gotta feel like you're in the Matrix a little bit.
Platform authentication, like there's just a ton of stuff that we didn't get a chance to cover. Macros. So if you are testing a site, for instance, and it uses JOT tokens, and you want to go collect a token and put it back in because you don't want Repeater to keep as the app logs you out. So a lot of apps will just log you out when you do something naughty, and you want to keep logging in so that your scans are more effective. There's a lot more to cover. So that being said, Brian, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you can take us out.
Oh, thanks a lot, Joe. This is great. Let me
a lot of ground to cover, right?
Yeah, and I'm really glad. You suggested breaking it up into two, because it's kind of hard to go from 0 to 60 with Burp when 0 to 30 can be like just set up and install. So I appreciate you mapping that out for us, and also giving us deeper dive and real nuanced stuff that I think trips a lot of us testers up. And I know plenty that got Burp because the boss wouldn't pay for maybe, I don't know, a commercial scanner or something like that. So they get it and they know enough to get it up and running, and they right click the root of the domain and say scan, turn it up to 11, and they go, and it'll find some stuff. But as you just demonstrated, you really got to get under the hood and kind of tinker with all the bells and whistles to get the most out of the scan. I'll just turn real quick to the two questions that came in. One was, can you use Foxy Proxy on Chrome?
Yes.
Yes, you
absolutely
can. Okay,
yep.
Well, I'm just going to do that right now. I'm going to say yes. I feel like a very official webinar. And then Randy asks, thoughts about using the edition of Burp Suite that comes with Kali? And I think that's just what they call the community edition, the free edition. So that's the same, right? Basically, community is free regardless of
I'll quickly show you the difference, and it's you can't run both at the same time. Although I'm going to, but it's going to complain about a couple of things. And I'll show you that the biggest difference that we talked about early on in the community versus the paid is the vulnerability scanner by itself. So all of the other things that we talked about so far, other than the scanning engine, the crawl and audit, you see right here it says upgrade to Burp Suite Pro.
Gotcha, yeah.
To find vulnerabilities. So this whole dashboard, they put the tab in, but it doesn't really do anything. Like all you can do, you can set your scope, you can do some of those other things, but it won't actually find any of these vulnerabilities right here. This is just a teaser. So you're like, oh, SQL injection, I need to pay.
Oh, okay, yep. And then quite a few of the fun toys in the store are paid only.
Yep.
You pointed that out too. So.
And that's when you sort by that. Like any of those ones that are blank, you can install. Any of the ones that aren't, and I would say, a majority of the really, really good stuff does require Pro, but there is a whole lot of, like CO2 we didn't talk about, Auth Matrix we didn't talk about. There's just a ton of them in there that don't require Pro, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that. So.
Okay, and I know we just got about one more minute, but one question came in last minute from our pal Ken. He says, with Flow, when you were talking about reviewing what payloads that were getting thrown at it, is there a way to jump right to the payloads that it found and not all of the ones, or do you have to filter by response codes or something?
I don't know of a way, because Flow is really not designed to show you like Burp. This was really basically people saying, we think Burp needs this so that we can see exactly everything that was touched, versus your target history is just going to be, your proxy history is going to be things you actively do.
Yeah.
Versus the scanning engine. So even if it's repeater or sequencer, if you want to see exactly what those are doing, the only way to get those really is something like Flow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish there was like a highlight payload, that there was some integration to Burp. Maybe that's something that in their API they could add as well.
That's awesome. Well, hey, I know we're a little bit over time here. Thanks. Thank you so much, Joe, for doing this. So we don't have a date yet for part 2, but stay tuned. We'll post it a lot on social media, 7ms.us/webinars. We'll have, our current and past schedule. I will get this one YouTubed soon, as well as the one we did a month ago or so that folks were asking for, the one where we talked about building kick-butt phishing campaigns. And hope you'll stay tuned and join us for the next one. And
you're supposed to pump your business, Brian. And if you need any pen testing,
it is security assessments, pen testing, and training. Just go to 7minutesecurity.com or save your finger some work and type 7minsec.com. And we're here for all your stay-at-home quarantine. Ship you a NUC to do everything remotely needs. So, I think that's it. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Be well, stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you in part 2.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, sir. Bye-bye.